And we're here today to discuss AI content and what machine learning, NLP, and deep learning can kind of add to the marketing stack. AI content has been a topic that's come up countless times in the last year or two in the marketing COE as this shiny object that has much promise yet to be delivered. However, in recent months, we've really seen significant strides in what the technology can deliver to content, powering transformative strategies to teams of all shapes and sizes. And we've obviously seen that more recently backed up in our investments in the space. So by popular demand, we've gathered a selection of industry experts to give us the rundown on what you need to know about the space, what this means for modern marketing teams, and how to get started. So firstly, we have Jamie Barnett. Jamie is a marketing advisor, mentor, and investor, and a seasoned marketing executive. She was the CMO of Netscope and AppZen, the chief customer officer at Scalar, and a VP of marketing at Citrix. She's also the author of this year's State of B2B CMO, which surveyed hundreds of CMOs on their benchmark budgets, investments, and software spending priorities. Jamie is the stickler when it comes to consistent brand messaging, and her survey found that those marketers that have built out messaging frameworks and stick to it are the most likely to hit their targets. Jamie is also an advisor on the writer leadership team who are joining us today. Secondly, we have Ty Magnin. As of this week, Ty is a VP of marketing at Emotive, an SMS marketing platform. Congrats on your first, 72 hours, Ty. Previously, Ty headed up all web and content marketing at UiPath, the automation platform, where he joined just after the Series B and led content marketing all the way through IPO. Ty is a long-term advocate of automation of all sorts and has helped implement Writer at UiPath across multiple teams to great success. Thirdly, we have Ryan Law. Ryan is the VP of content marketing at Animalz, the renowned content marketing agency. Ryan's job is to champion content marketing that grows revenue, and he's been an explorer and advocate in the world of AI-generated content since he first got access to GPT-3 in 2020. Ryan just this week published an article on the Animalz blog that everybody should check out, titled 6 Predictions about AI in Content Marketing, and we'll share that in the follow-up. Finally, we have May Habib. May is the CEO and co-founder of Writer, an AI writing platform for teams. She is an expert in natural language processing, AI-driven language generation, and the evolving ways that we use language online. Writer's customers include a who's who of some of the most forward-thinking teams in tech, from Intuit and Twitter to Figma and HubSpot. And the team at Writer is at the forefront of creating this exciting new technology and getting it in the hands of the enterprise. So today, in the 50 minutes that we have, we're going to kick off with the State of the Nation with May. So what does best in class look like? How do you dip your toes in the water of AI content? What's involved in a content strategy supported by AI? And then we're going to bring it to the rest of the panel, topics around what is this kind of word soup of AI, ML, NLP, DL? What's the future of AI content? How advanced will NLP get in the near term? What should CMOs be thinking about in terms of bringing in AI content strategy? What does budgets look like? Things like that. So we welcome all questions in the chat. As Christina mentioned, this is an open forum. That's the beauty of having this as an open Zoom. But to kick us off, I'll pass it over to May to bring us through where we are in AI content today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. Can everyone hear me all right? Awesome. Yay. I'm really excited. We designed the webinar with Paul and Christina as a conversation. So I definitely want the folks on the call to pepper us with questions and really drive the discussion. I think I am joined by really the folks who are most advanced on this topic. We've got people on the phone who have multiple conversations about AI generated content every day, and folks who have put it into practice to meet marketing goals. So I'm very excited and really want to make sure that we're on the same page as to what is the state of the art, as Paul said. And it definitely involves a little bit of a alphabet soup, and so want to get folks primed up for the conversations that they are bound to have internally. So first, a little bit about us. Our vision is great writing for everyone. We are building Outrider, an AI writing platform for work, but our goals are very ambitious. By everyone, we mean billions of people, and we're starting with the words that we think matter the most, those that we write at work. We've been joined on our journey by 100+ enterprise customers who really believe in the power of words to transform their brands and their user journeys. So we're very proud to partner, as Paul said, with some of the best content teams in the world. And the journey that we are all on together is, how do we use AI in ways that speed things up, improve quality, improve the day-to-day workflows of what really are the best writers at a company. So a lightning speed primer, because AI generated content is going to be controversial, especially in these early stages of where the market is. And so marketers really understanding the foundations of the technology and how it works is going to be paramount. And we have found that the folks who really can explain at a high level what this is, it's not magic, it's technology, have the best shot at really bringing people along with them and implementing it. So really starting from the very outside of the onion in, what is AI? It's simply engineering that allows machines to exhibit human intelligence. So we can have a debate if we want in the Q&A around sentient and general intelligence, but I spoke with Larry on his content strategy podcast. Larry Swenson, folks may know him from the content strategy world. And we said something to the tune of, if LLMs, large language models, are general intelligence, then we have all been fooled. So, we are definitely, I think, a ways from it, but AI really describes just this general field of trying to get close. Machine learning is a field of AI which uses techniques that mean that we don't have to explicitly program stuff. We don't have to show models, we don't have to show programs specific examples of what we want in order to get what we want. And there are techniques that make machine learning possible at such a human-like quality, including deep learning. So it is a very promising and really the dominant now approach to machine learning that uses data and artificial neurons, which is software, to really get output that approximates what a human would answer, or what an expert human even would write or answer. So that is kind of the foundation, AI, then ML, then deep learning. Then we've got the field of NLP, natural language processing, that has benefited from advances in deep learning. And within NLP, you'll hear us talk about natural language understanding, which is programs that can figure out what something is saying in text, and natural language generation, which is where a writer sits, which is creating a human-like text. Now, we actually are both NLU and NLG because we both edit and write, so that's NLU and NLG. And NLP is the field in which we sit. Then you've got, there's a little bit more, you'll hear words like model in the field of NLG. And a model is specifically a program that can recognize certain patterns. It is not necessarily explicitly programmed to find and repeat certain patterns, but it can by virtue of just the size of the model and the training data that has been used to improve the output. So it is a narrowing of the intelligence. And then you'll hear us today talk about LLMs, which is shorthand for large language models. Large language models and transformer models have become synonymous in this world. And for purposes of this conversation, they are massive, really gigantic, universal, hence the image, models that work really well on language problems. And so examples of LLMs are, starting from the top, OpenAI's GPT-3. There are open source versions of GPT. GPT-J is one of them. BERT, which is a transformer model that is really good at NLU, and that's from academia working with Google. And TNLG is a Microsoft NVIDIA version of GPT-3, which is bigger than GPT-3. And then PaLM is a large language model from Google. And that is all kind of required understanding to know what fine tuning is. And fine tuning is basically taking a large foundational transformer model or large language model and narrowing it more precisely for a specific set of tasks. So writing a blog post or translation or text summarization are all examples of how you can fine tune a large language model for a more specific purpose. And kind of this assembly line of fine tuning has come to be called transfer learning. So this is all very, state of the art stuff. And you all are now very up to date on like the most common terms and really the foundational terms. So what does this actually look like in real life? This is an example from Writer. On the left, you've got our fine-tuned press release template that's got some inputs that a user puts in. So at the top, you've got event, who, writer, and Contentful. We launched a partnership with Contentful a couple of weeks ago, a great product integration. We actually wrote our press release using Writer. We use Writer a lot internally. And what you see on the right is 100% the first draft that came out of Writer. So incredibly rich. It actually, Writer wrote the second part of my quote. I wanted it to talk about, I wanted to talk about content, using content in modular ways, and Writer completed that. So incredibly powerful results out of the box as a result of the fine tuning on what press releases look like. This is another example of state of the art when something is both customized for a use case and a customer. On the left is a template for a specific type of format that Intuit uses, and folks can actually start the GIF over. You can select under product name, which of the products you are promoting, and the value prop you want in the banner. And on the right are examples of output that can be used that fit the data model of headline, subhead, and CTA for that specific content type. So state of the art really looks like this. And I thought we could play a little quiz to make sure I did a good job outlining the terms here. Writer is NLG that uses, what might the first ad lib be? I'm opening up the comment here. Comment box. Anybody? Anyone have an idea of what I am missing here in the Writer description? Here are our options. Our options are all things that all terms that we've covered already. Fine tuning, LLMs, Dan, model, NLP. What about the second one? All right, so here are the answers. Very close, Mallory, to inputs. So Writer is NLG, natural language generation, with fine-tuned large language models that can be further fine-tuned with a customer's own training data. Yes, you were definitely close, Dan. And this is the machine learning part. And the rules-based stuff There's actually machine learning in here too, but it's not large language model type NLG generation. Editorial style, brand voice, your terminology, the data model, i.e. how long should the subhead be, and do I need to start headlines with a verb? That is all stuff that is programmed. It's not machine learning, and plagiarism checks. So we'll talk about that in the discussion, why that's important. So that is a little primer on the language that you all will hear if you dig just a little bit deeper beyond the application level of what is of what AI generated content is really about. We could spend hours on this. We probably will do more webinars on kind of going deeper into the tech. But for the purposes of this conversation, how can large language models be used in marketing? And the answer is a little scary, right? The answer is everywhere, because we do so much writing in marketing, right? Across that entire user journey, every touch point requires content, written content. And the tighter it is, the more on brand it is, the more consistent it is, the stronger the brand. And these are some of the outputs, example outputs of what we've got to write as we build demand and relationships with our audience. And then there's, of course, all of the foundational content that drives in different versions so much of the content that gets developed downstream. So the answer to how LLMs can be used in marketing is very, very broad. And we hope this conversation can really help you orient and create a roadmap around where applied in your business it can have the most transformation. So the goal of folks who are using Writer is to basically take this map of the kind of content that they're building and really use that to build a library of ways that LLM can help speed up some of that content production across their journey. So this is what many of our customers have done to great success. Some of them are on the call today, and would love to talk about the field very generally, because it is exploding. And in addition to generalist tools like Writer that are really built for teams that have already got content folks and have mature content practices, there are a plethora of players now working both in industry and very specific use case applications, as well as more vertical or horizontal rather applications. So in the writing assistant world, i.e. folks who are doing NLU or editing using machine learning and LLMs, we're joined by Grammarly and WordTune. There are a lot of writing assistants, but no one is outside of Microsoft, Google, and the folks in this category is using transformer models in production. So folks like a Ginger or a Pro Writing Aid are also writing assistants, but are on an older version of the technology. Then you've got the world of automated style guides, where there is AI being used and NLU being used to edit content. There's the world of the tool providers. So folks like OpenAI, Cohere, and increasingly the lab behind WordTune, providing APIs for folks to build their own applications on top of foundational LLMs. Then you've got the more niche content generation folks. So in the content generation world, there are literally, and I mean this literally, hundreds of players, because what people have done is basically build applications on top of APIs. We're the only folks who are going further than that and fine-tuning further within this space right now. Then there are companies that have either done transformer models or built on top of the APIs in some way or other to generate output that is either SEO specific, HR specific, or chatbot specific. So it's a super, super interesting space. 2 years ago, it was really just Grammarly Us and OpenAI, and now a lot of folks have adopted this technology. Some of them may have been around before, many of them were, but only more recently come to adopt LLMs and transformers in what they're doing. So with that, I would love to move to a conversation. There are already a ton of questions, which is very exciting. I've got a handful prepared for the folks on the call because I want to make sure we get some of the foundational thoughts on the table before branching off. We could really be talking about this for hours. We intend this webinar to be a great starting point for leaders who are trying to figure out how to start. And with that, I would love Ryan Law to shoot the first question over to you. You set content marketing, LinkedIn, aflutter a couple weeks ago when you wrote kind of cryptically, if you are in content marketing and don't think AI is set to transform your job, you're in for an awakening, something along those lines. And I have never seen 120 comments rack up so fast. So you followed that up with an awesome article yesterday. Would love to ask you, and we'll put all of this in the show notes, and if someone can drop it in the chat, that would be great. Ryan, I would love to ask you very concretely, how is Animalz using AI-generated content? How do you think you'll be using AI-generated content?
Yeah, thank you, May. And I would love to answer that as concretely as I can as well. We're kind of thinking about this opportunity in 3 different ways. So the first of this is, what are the discrete process improvements we can unlock using AI? So if you imagine a writer's workflow, there are parts of what we do every day that are just plain harder than other parts. A really common example, I quite often ask our writers for every blog post they create to try and come up with 20 different titles, because that's generally where the magic happens. That's where you get the best title. And that's a really, really hard thing to do. What normally happens is we pick one title that we like and we get it lodged in our brain in a kind of mental rut, and we then create 19 minor variations of that. So actually exploring AI as a way of blasting through those kind of human bottlenecks is a really interesting thing to do, because it doesn't have those same biases. It will come up with things that are very radically different to what you would come up with. And that's a great brainstorming starting point. The second thing we're thinking about is, what would this look like at a slightly broader scale? There are parts of our job that aren't just hard, that are actually, in some cases, unskilled or unfun and unsatisfying. We're exploring whether there are opportunities to use AI generation in a more wholesale way. So the example I'm exploring a lot at the moment is some of the more utilitarian SEO content. A lot of the stuff that ranks, and ranks well in many cases, is very simplistic. There's no narrative. There are a lot of definitions in there, maybe simple processes, all stuff that arguably AI could do a very, very good job with just a tiny little bit of human input. So that's something we're doing at the moment, running a few personal experiments to see if we can build out good, simple search content that is largely AI generated. And then the third thing, which we're the third thing we're thinking about is just assuming maybe this technology becomes the most important thing in the world, completely changes our jobs. What could we as skilled human beings do on top of that? Where is there still room for humans to add value? Because there's a lot of stuff that these amazing models still can't do, and they're probably not going to do in the near future. They're not going to interview people. They can't go out and have personal experiences. They're probably not going to come up with really amazing contrarian industry insights based on all of their experience. So even if AI does kind of take the bottom out of the big content marketing market, there's still so many opportunities for skilled creative people to work on top of that and add all this amazing content that AI is probably not going to touch, at least for a very, very long time.
Yeah, awesome. I definitely agree with all of that, Ryan. Have you all been seeing in the industry prospective clients who are coming in for that bucket 2, or are doing bucket 2 internally already? Bucket 2 being the simpler SEO focused or SEO goal oriented type of content.
If anything, it's kind of interesting. We've seen the inverse, I think, because of where our agency is positioned. We're, high end, and we're kind of where a lot of companies come to when they've had bad experiences with content that wasn't as good, and they want, human experts looking at it. But we're still really interested in this because we have a very privileged macro view of our industry because of all the people we work with. And we think there are opportunities probably for all companies, including ourselves, to use this in some beneficial capacity. So we're just trying to play with that a little bit at the moment.
One thing to note, and you all may have seen that and caught it in the press release example, large language models like to make up facts. And the game that large language models are playing is what comes next. And in press releases, there are quotes. And so they are going to create the quotes if you don't provide the quotes. And so part of what is really, really fascinating right now, as people adopt our technology, is working with content experts to help them really almost internalize what the model is good at by working with it for an extended period of time. And so anything that is a fact or really the novelty part of the content, we call claims. And the claims that you want this piece of content to make, you better be providing it because it's going to make it up itself if you don't. And so it is a fun way to think about that content strategist V2 that you talked about, Brian.
Yeah, I completely agree with. Oh, sorry, mate. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. That was it.
I was just going to say, yeah. So the thing we're finding at the moment is actually front loading a little bit of skilled human input right at the beginning. So in our case, like the outlining stage, for example, is what is generating the best quality output. So exactly as you say, seed it with the important facts, the important business related messages and product points you want to get across, and let it kind of work within the constraints you as a human being with fact checking and diligence have imposed upon it. And that's been working well so far. Yeah.
And like all new things in marketing, understanding the underlying technology here is so important. You think about people who are really good at performance marketing. They are very good at how the ads algorithms work and how that auction works, right? Like people really need to understand AI in order to make it work for them. And this is definitely in the field of AI generated content, one of those fields. I would love to ask Ty Magnin a question related to adoption, because as we think about those parts of the writing process where AI takes the lead, where people take the lead, it does require socialization. And you all, and I hadn't thought about this, in a lot of ways, are a very likely candidate at UiPath to be early adopters of this technology, because you all are an automation platform yourselves. So would love for you to talk about how you thought about automation in content marketing, and then how you sold the idea and how it's going.
Yeah, of course. I didn't think about that connection either. I just think we're humans and we're all a little lazy, right? And writer and AI generated content, or really for us, it was the editorial tools, right? So kind of like the common use cases we know Grammarly is great at, using those for our enterprise was a no-brainer, right? Because teaching, we started small at UiPath. We used Writer for, 10 or maybe 20 people that were the highest content producing folks in the organization. But at UiPath, we're 4,000 people, and content is getting created from all corners of the business, right? So in marketing alone, you have agencies all over the world that are producing content, right? You have field marketers, you have product marketers, brand marketers, the list goes on. And to get everyone to sound the same, or at least pretty damn close, right, is a really important part of us building our brand. So to do that, there's kind of a few different ways. You can go the manual way of teaching and doing webinars and distributing a style guide, or you can do it the lazy way, right? The automated way, which is to use a tool like Writer that you can sort of program your style guide into and give people licenses to it. So we started with 10 or 20. And And kind of just word of mouth, we kept identifying more and more people. We let them try it with like an extra license. They liked it, they loved it. They talked to a department head, and then we'd buy another, I don't know, 20, 50, 100 licenses. So it really has spread quite quickly. And now I imagine it's installed. Haven't looked at the weekly active users or monthly actives, but it's probably installed on a couple hundred people's desktops.
Yeah, I do think this is the kind of technology where seeing is believing, and it's two things are required. There's like that first aha moment, and then there is how do you build it into a workflow in ways that it's habit forming, because that's how, you know, you all as marketing leaders really get the kind of process and efficiencies that we're looking for. So the start small, I think, is great advice. Jamie, for you, as at every role you have been at, you have been the brand police, and
which is horrible.
I love it. Everybody needs, maybe brand security guard is better branding.
Okay.
Or advocate. Let's do brand advocate. And what I love about what UiPath was able to do is really turn those couple hundred writer users into like walking, talking brand advocates, because they are learning from their own content what is on brand and taking that into other realms. When you look at AI generated content versus just AI edited content, what gives you the like creeps? What makes you nervous about quality? How are marketing leaders going to make sure that it is not garbage in, garbage out when it comes to AI generated content?
Right. You know, most AI generated content is just hideous. So I'm very skeptical. I think probably the biggest problem is that a lot of it is created by non-writers. And so if you think about, I'll give you a different example unrelated to AI generated, which is, well, maybe there's some AI involved, but if you use Siri and your iPhone just text to voice, and you use Apple products, you'll notice that, you know, spell checking, or they'll actually change your words and insert apostrophes where they don't belong, or don't have apostrophes where there should be. And it's hideous. And I've probably tweeted once, if I've tweeted 20 times to Apple engineering, like, not only are you guys not doing, you know, grammar and, you know, good writing, but you're also doing it inconsistently across your products. So it's driving me crazy. And, you know, same goes for any big tech company. So clearly these technologies are not created for writers by writers. And, you know, so if I kind of abstract a little bit and just kind of did some thinking around like, okay, well, what does, because I've used writers, AI generated content a lot, and comparing it to kind of the other experiences that I've had, I'm abstracting, I think 5 things that really matter. The first one is this notion of being created by writers, people who care about good writing and the fundamentals. The second one, and actually somebody asked a question about, you know, how do you make it more and more like kind of your own writing? And I would say that training on your voice is going to be really important, like how you talk as a company, your persona. So the more you can train kind of on your own best content, I think is going to really make a difference. The third, I would call these requirements actually. The third requirement is like, it needs to incorporate your style guide. So again, going back to the, you know, weird capitalizations, weird, you know, starting a bulleted list, for example, with verbs versus nouns and things like that, making things consistent. I think incorporating your style guide is really important. That's one thing that you guys do, which I appreciate. The fourth is having guardrails for bias and even just simply healthy communication. So making sure that all feel welcome when they read your content. That's really important. And then the fifth thing is just where the AI can sort of detect, when you talked about claims earlier, detect when there is a fact and either be able to itself kind of look through the content and be able to say, okay, this is validated, or where it will flag you if it needs to be validated by a human. And that's really powerful because it pulls the human in and alerts them to potentially inaccurate content. So those would be kind of my 5 requirements.
That is so good, Jamie. That should be a manifesto. Those 5. I put them in the chat. I love this. The first one is kind of obvious in retrospect, but subtle also. Like, is it created by writers? Is it writers who are using the AI generated content tools? And that's really important for marketing leaders to really feel like, A, they own their own means of production, and B, that they've got confidence in this. This is not something that is going to represent the brand that has just been, spit out by a tool, and someone who's not a great writer is responsible for publishing it. The training on your own data, I'm biased, but I think that is table stakes for companies. Incorporating a style guide, having guardrails for bias. We should probably talk about that in the Q&A around the fact that large language models are backwards looking. Yes, 2019, 2018, we can go that much further than that, most of the foundational models, but most of the stuff on the internet has been written a decade ago. So just the really making sure that we are not putting content out there that perpetuates things that we're trying to stop. And then, of course, is it factual? And how do I make sure nothing gets past me? And we've got, we're in the lucky position of having customers who have AI ethicists on staff. And I remember one of our first folks in the closed beta using Writer to write some really compelling content on why Trump won the last election, not Biden. Making up all sorts of facts. And they brought this to us and they were like, hello, what are we doing about this? And so, together we've worked on claims identification showing up in the UI. So, it is something that as early adopters in the industry, we're going to be working together to solve. So that's awesome, Jamie, I love that. And maybe with that, we can open it up to questions from the audience. We've had a bunch already, and perhaps we actually start with the ones around SEO. So I definitely have thoughts on this. Ryan Law, I'm sure you do as well. Do you want to maybe take the first stab at how does Google see AI generated content? What do we think Google is going to do about it?
Yeah, I do have a few thoughts. My kind of pet hypothesis is that Google probably doesn't want this, and it's probably going to be bad for users, but it's probably going to happen anyway, and there's not much they can do about it. A few thoughts. I think the closest parallel we have to this currently is spun content. So that used to be the way of creating spam du jour a few years ago. And Google is very, very good at detecting that, and it can penalize sites that have spun content. But the problem with that is that there are hallmarks of spinning within spun content because it is basically just using synonyms. So the underlying structure is the same, that can be detected, that can be penalized. These language models don't work in that same way. They are creating original content. As you say, they are using the rules of language as they understand it to create new stuff that hasn't been seen, that doesn't follow such a prescriptive format. And I'm not an engineer, so I know there are efforts on the way to systematically identify this stuff, but I think it's going to be really hard to do that. And even if they can do that, there are all sorts of really interesting ethical implications. Like if an article is outlined by a human, generated by AI, edited by a human, should that be penalized? I don't know. I'm not sure how Google would tackle that to begin with.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Ryan. I think identification is going to be really difficult. Identifying what percentage of something has been worked through is going to be really difficult. What is easier to do is to, in the rankings, actually privilege that content that is more personal, that includes more facts, right? The Google Fact Detection API, this is literally what their multi-trillion-dollar business is about, is facts. And so I think those of us who really follow that manifesto and do what your agency supports on the thought leadership side. Right now, there's a bit of a silo in content marketing, like what's for SEO, what's for thought leadership? Well, I do think Google is going to tackle the span du jour of people not working through the content and not using it by writers or advancing their content strategy using AI as a tool rather than as the primary output. I think the way that they're going to tackle it is by speeding up the information gain improvements and doing that more holistically. Katie, I love your comment. Someone comparing AI to designers using Photoshop. Yeah, I think that's great, and we've had that comparison for writer quite a bit because of the style guide feature and the ability to kind of build in those guardrails around brand within the product. Anything else on the SEO aspect? Ty and Jamie, Ty, you own SEO too. How have you thought about content generation, the SEO strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think about things like dwell time as a really important factor.
Oh, so good. Yeah.
Right. And so like, if you're going to just crank, I mean, the writer's AI content generation tool is very impressive. I think it's surprisingly impressive. But even so, like to put a hook at the top, right, that's maybe personal about the author, like it's not going to come up with that, I don't think, on its own often. So good content's going to get better dwell time. Google's going to recognize that and give that the boost over the rest. So it's always going to take some amount of writing.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with that. There is a question around accessibility and inclusive language, and those are really, really important. OpenAI has definitely been actually at the forefront of, I think they did a manifesto on this, of saying, those of us who are building large language models have got the responsibility to put in those kind of ethical guardrails ourselves and not let the models spew hate speech and other things, other ilk. But from a facts perspective and a fake news perspective, that those things are not addressed, and those are kind of second order hate speech if you think of it that way. And so some of the very, very basic stuff has been addressed, but there is still a ton of room for abuse, and this is why the AI generated content tools for companies being in the hands of people that you trust is so important, because they're the ones who really have to make sure they're editing that content as if a freelance writer wrote it, as if a writer internally wrote it, and not somebody that they trust to publish immediately on the site, like without any review at all. So it is definitely still an issue. We address it in our product by running it through our own accessibility and biased language detectors. So this is something people have used Writer for since the beginning. And we've got customers who put in their own layer of accessibility language and program that into Writer's terminology tools. And so those are the terms that are used within the platform. So it's not a set it and forget it. Like, this has got to be very thoughtfully done for your content to for you to have confidence that your content addresses these things. Any other ideas or thoughts on accessibility, or anyone who's played around with getting
practically speaking, we are head of D&I, right, diversity and inclusion at UiPath. had an interest in, of course, getting the company to use inclusive language. So we used Writer and leaned on that as the primary device in order to help her achieve her mission, and have seen some success. I believe we haven't measured before and after. I think the way Writer's tools, the editor and the content generator, play together is quite nice in this way, right? If you produce a blog article with the generator, you can then edit it with the editing tools. At least that's the way it works today for us. Maybe there's a different way to do it. And then you can make sure that you have the right language for your brand, tone, and voice.
Yeah, thanks, Ty. We have a question about long form content, tools that are better for long form content versus short form content. Ryan or Jamie, have you all experimented with kind of things, tools in the field, or your own workflows and processes around generating content in long form?
Yeah, so Jamie, you can go ahead if you want.
I have a short answer, which is, yeah, I think it's a question of the models that you're using. And I mean, I've used Writer for both short form, coming up with a headline, versus long form, like a blog post. And those are relying on, different inputs. And so to me, it's more about the model than the tool.
I have a slightly longer answer, but obviously as an agency, we do largely long form content. So the very first thing we did, we got access to GPT-3, was say, write a blog post about this, and we hit generate and we just let it do its thing. And it was a mess, like absolute mess. It was a kind of simulacrum of content. If you squint a little bit, it kind of reads like a human wrote it, but there's no narrative, there are no points made to it. What we found does work better is arriving at long things by writing lots of short things and stitching that together and kind of bootstrapping, which is where this whole outlining thing comes into play, I think. If you have a human to sit down and say, this is the outcome we want, these are maybe the 6 points we're going to talk about to get there, and then allow the AI to generate between those and maybe look at some of the existing text for context, there you do get much more compelling results. Because if you just let it run amok, it will absolutely run amok, I think.
Yeah, agree.
It's also just, I just saw Katie at the start in the chat mention she uses Writer as a pair writing partner, brainstorming buddy. Like, I think it's interesting how people approach what Writer is as a tool or other AI writing tools. Is it an input-output engine, which kind of gets you the 5 things you need to know about this? Or is it something that is a big help in the process of creating content? And I think, there's lots of innovative ways that you can use it. But if you're, when we invested in Writer, I remember everybody in the team kind of rubbing their hands with glee that we no longer have to write our own blog posts. But a lot of our blog posts is pretty deep content that is ideally going in the direction of thought leadership and saying something net new. And so we would use something like Writer as a creative tool for us to kind of get our thoughts out there, rather than something that's just going to take very quick brief and in 5 minutes produce a 2,000 word thought piece.
Yeah. Now on the short form content, and we get a lot of questions around long form content, but customers who have been customers of Writer for a while will tell you that some of the biggest time savings actually comes from the short form content, of taking that 2,000 word article that they wrote and generating the Twitter post and the LinkedIn post and the metadata and the email subject line and the email pre-header, stuff that can actually take a day of somebody really thinking through. I sometimes internally call it like that, your self-loathing, the writer's block self-loathing of like, why can't I come up with a pre-header that fits with Carrie? Like, why can't I do this right now? I am a loser. It's like my own self-talk, right? And that's the kind of stuff that Writer is really, really good at. And so, it's kind of like social packaging of the thought leadership around thought leadership content is where we think a lot of time savings can be had. And right now, those are like pretty custom templates that customers have built, but we are going to do an out-of-box one for kind of packaging up that content. And that maybe brings us to the last, maybe we do 2 more questions, but the second to last question around personalizing the content to the user. I have posted before around the data scientist become content strategists. And I do think personalizing by audience segment is definitely a great use case for the LLMs. But it does require folks to really think about that audience segment and like, what do you mean when you say personalized? Are you simply swapping out product names and titles? Or is there which doing rules-based and more modularly actually through your own CMS tools is the best way to address? Or do you want to be generating different types of ideas and maybe the brand voice actually is a little bit different? And our customer success and support teams are really great editorial thought partners to our content strategy customers around thinking about ways in which they can build custom templates and ways that they can train the templates to do what it is that they want the output to be and do. It's not a out of the box, one click and my content is personalized. Like it does require a simple but a data science kind of approach to understanding. Do I actually have enough personalized content? Do I have a good idea of the parameters of how I want to personalize in order for this to be, not a pipe dream, but something that actually works? And maybe the last question around AI content writers, the macro environment jobs, and I would love to have the other panelists take a crack at this one. Do we think AI generated content is a net negative or a net positive to the very, very important individual writers and editors that are the backbone of the space? Maybe we go Jamie, Ryan, and Ty in that order.
Oh, goody, I get to talk. I feel so passionately about this because I'm a big writer myself. Even when I was a CMO, it's like I would still take on a lot of writing. I love it. But writing has, for me, two parts, a smart part and a slog. And it's like you come up with this great piece of, this great data point or this great framework or some kind of huge finding that you want to share. And, you got to write not just one piece about it, but of course, any content writer knows that they're writing multiple pieces. You have your big blog, you have your report, your ebook, your, maybe your video script, maybe an abstract for press. So you have a ton of different things that need to come out of it. And maybe even over time, maybe you're updating the data over time. So you just have a lot that you need to create. And for me, like, I want to get onto that next smart part and be really, be really fresh and generate ideas. I love the ideation part. And so if I have to slog for days just to create all the crap, it's just demoralizing. So I mean, I can understand some trepidation, but for me, like as a content generator myself, I love the idea of leverage.
Yeah, love that, Jamie.
I think from my perspective as well, I completely agree with all of that. I think it's quite tempting for people like us who've predicated our careers on writing well. This is scary, and it's quite natural to be protective over the role we currently have. But I'm kind of reminded of the fact that the role we have today is itself a product of new technology in the form of the internet. Like content marketers, the workflow we have today did not exist like this 10 years ago. So yeah, I think things are probably going to change in some capacity. There will be some kind of disruption, recomposition of what our roles look like. But I think the progress we made getting to this point, we're going to see even more progress. The role should become more fun, higher leverage, exactly as you said, Jamie.
Also agree. I think if you take a step back and you can kind of see this problem not on this sort of micro personal writing level, but really it's about automation and it's about AI. And this dialogue's happening at a very high level and has been going on for years, right? And UiPath, of course, has dealt with this in some ways as a software automation platform. And really what happens is, and we've seen this firsthand, yes, there are some times where people get displaced, right? And it sucks. But more often than that, like 5 times, 10 times, I don't know the number, you see people get to really focus on the higher value work, right? So for content writers, now you can focus on strategy, right? What posts are you going to write? Where are you going to distribute it? All those pieces that I think add up to a successful content piece.
Yeah, Yeah, I so agree with that. I don't think we're going to see layoffs because AI generated content is taken over. I think AI generated content is going to mean more content marketing jobs because people are going to get leverage faster, which means content marketing will impact marketers meeting goals faster, which means marketers get more budget to do more content marketing. We're biased. We're a completely inbound driven product and go to market, which means content, thought leadership, SEO. I mean, it is all customer stories. It's all literally the only go to market we do. So I have so enjoyed being with you all today. Thank you for the awesome questions. Let's just get into the heart of it. Benoit, that is, I hope not going to be the case, but I love the alliteration. Thanks everybody for joining us, and look forward to continuing the conversation. It's really just the start of this dialogue. I think this is the most interesting conversations about how enterprises using AI generated content is happening in this community, and excited. Hopefully this is just the start.
Yeah, and from our side, thank you to May, Jamie, Ryan, and Ty. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time today. This has been a super insightful panel. For everybody who joined, the recording will be sent out. We'll have a blog post follow up. We'll include May's slides. If you have any questions, you can send them directly to my email, which is also on the invite. But again, to the panel, super appreciate your insights here. It was an incredibly informative session. Thanks to everybody for joining, and we'll see you again for the next one.